Thank you, Alexander. Ladies and gentlemen, so I will try to give you some information about the activities of what's called the Air Infiltration and Ventilation Center. You should see now my screen coming. Okay, so I will briefly present you what is AIVC about and what kind of interactions we have with other initiatives. So it will start with briefly saying where is ventilation a point of activity within the IEA, then what about AIVC specifically, what we're doing today and for the next years to come. And then I will highlight the fact that we are combining forces with three initiatives called Tight Vent, Venticool, and QualiCheck, and then finally some conclusions. So first of all, IEA and ventilation, what's going on in that area. I think this scheme in a different way, you heard it before, presented by Peter Cunz and also Andreas Ekmans. So the AIVC, which you see at the bottom in the middle, is also called Annex 5 within the Energy and Buildings and Communities program, of which Andreas is the chair. But we have had a lot of other annexes which are already finished. You see it at the left at the bottom. And also we have, of course, a number of annexes which are running. And then we have, at the level of another implementing agreement called Solar Heating and Cooling, also a number of projects. And in the number of them, I marked it in yellow, you have, let's say, projects where ventilation is a substantial part or, let's say, also covered. Within the context of what we call EBC, you have here a list, I think, of the annexes which almost fully are a substantial part were dealing with ventilation. So the oldest one, called Annex 5, is the Air Infiltration and Ventilation Center, and it's basically an information center, whereas all the others are, you can say, collaborative research projects that you see. Annex 9 dealing with minimum ventilation rates, Annex 23 multi-zone airflow modeling, Annex 35 control strategies for hybrid ventilation, and the most recent one, Annex 62 on ventilative cooling. So AIVC is not the only annex in the framework of the IEA, but as it is the only information center and it was existing for more than 30 years, it's a somewhat special case. Few words about the history of AIVC. It was created in 1979, but then it was called the Air Infiltration Center, AIC. You have to see it in the context, as also I think Peter Cunz explained. It was the 70s with the oil crisis, so there was a lot of attention how to reduce the energy consumption, and then it was thought, okay, let's try to make our buildings more airtight. But the years after, there was also growing awareness, but we should not only make it airtight, we should also ventilate correctly, and therefore the name became Air Infiltration and Ventilation Center, so AIVC. We have seen some further evolutions over the years. For example, in the 90s, a growing interest for ventilation and summer comfort, because we felt that clearly appropriate ventilation can also contribute to sustainable summer comfort. We had then in 2011 a substantial change in the operation mode, and you see since then we see a growing number of countries. Also this year we expect a few more countries, and we have now a new what's called operating period from January this year till the end of 2016. Within the IEVC, we work with what is called projects, so that is a series of reports, webinars, workshops, conferences, or sessions at conferences. You see here some of them which are running or which are, let's say, almost close. That is in dark blue. We have a lot of activities dealing with the issue of air tightness. We have then, you see, ventilative cooling, ventilation needs and health, and also steps to improve the quality of residential ventilation systems. For a lot of activities, webinars, workshops, conferences are important, and just a few highlights. So you see here about philosophy on air tightness requirements. We had an international workshop in March 2012 where about 10-15 countries we were analyzing the requirements, the philosophy behind it, so to have a better understanding what is the logic behind imposing requirements, the advantages, the disadvantages. Other example of a project about durability aspect of air tightness. You don't want to have it tight for one day but for years. There we had last year in Washington, D.C., an international workshop on the topic of durability of air tightness. Another example now in the area of ventilation, steps to improve the quality of residential ventilation systems. There we had last year in March an international workshop in Brussels where again we tried to collect information for a lot of countries. So what is the status, what's going on, what are the experiences with the functioning of ventilation systems, and good ideas to make it work better. In the area of airtightness, we also try to work as some information platform. We call it TAC, Tight Vent Airtightness Associations Committee. And for example, there we had in November 2 webinars where, for a number of countries, let's say the approach on airtightness testing was compared. What's in the pipeline for this year? We have next month a workshop in Brussels on the topic of quality of methods for measuring ventilation and air infiltration in buildings, so about the accuracy, measurement techniques, and so on. So I would say, I think, quite interesting for research-oriented people. And then in September, we have our annual AIVC conference, now for the 35th time. It's in Poznan in Poland, together with the 4th Tight Vent conference and the 2nd Venticool conference. And so the title is Ventilation and Air Tightness in Transforming the Building Stock to High Performance. And you can submit abstracts till the middle of March. In terms of communication, we also are more and more looking to how to use, let's say, YouTube for dissemination of information. And at the moment, I think we have about 60 recordings available on YouTube. We are also there trying to improve our communication, that interested people get more easily access to these YouTube recordings. Another area of activity of AIVC is to see where is, let's say, opportunities or needs for new international collaboration, which then in the framework of IEA could take the form of a new annex. And so there we work in close collaboration with, of course, the EXCO. And let's say there a recent annex, which I think was to a large extent due to this work, was Annex 62 on ventilative cooling. And I will say afterwards a few words more about this annex. In our dissemination strategy, our website, which was renewed last year, is crucial. I would say please have a look to it. You'll find there a lot of information. I just want to highlight one thing. We have there a large database called Airbase with more than 17,000 abstracts on ventilation-related information, and more than 5,000 PDF documents can be downloaded. And the ambition is in the 2 years to come that all these 17,000 documents will be available online. So that about AIVC specifically. Then, as I said, a few words about where do we try to combine forces to increase the impact. The first one is on tight vent. So what's the context? I think, as you all know, we are moving, in particular in Europe, to nearly zero energy buildings by 2020, but it's also elsewhere in the world, I think, growing interest in this area. It's clear you cannot achieve that in most climates without paying attention to air tightness. And of course, if you come to more airtight building, having good ventilation is also important, and so that means energy efficient ventilation. And so a key challenge is then build tight, ventilate right, and we don't have years to prepare ourselves. So clearly, the expectation is between now and 2020 that in most countries there will be more or less systematic testing of airtightness, and that should of course be done in a good way, in an economic way, efficient way, reliable way. And that's the reason why at the end of 2010, it was decided to set up a specific platform called Tight Vent Europe, focusing on building and ductwork airtightness in combination with a number, let's say, of industry partners. We have there twice a year newsletter, which you can download on the website. And what are the objectives of Tight Vent? That first of all, raise awareness about the importance of airtightness and airtightness testing. Secondly, raise awareness about existing approaches for, let's say, this approach to test airtightness and to do it in an efficient, qualitative way. And then thirdly, identify and support a long-term action plan with respect to this large scale-up of airtightness testing. And in that sense, so we have, I would say, a quite good collaboration between AIVC and Tight Vent. AIVC is more focusing on the knowledge generation aspects, whereas Tight Vent is more focusing on market implementation, but both focused on the topic of building and ductwork airtightness. Second platform where we combine forces is Venticool, and you can say to a large extent a somewhat similar approach. I think it's all clear that in this context of moving to nearly zero energy buildings, indoor climate, summer comfort becomes important, and in a way that it is also comfortable, not just and not something like you see here on the picture. I think also we don't want our buildings full of, let's say, active air conditioning systems. So we want really to come to sustainable solutions for, let's say, good thermal comfort. And that's where we see, let's say, interesting opportunities, let's say, by intelligent combination of thermal mass, solar control, and ventilative cooling. And this in a context, I say, when we move rapidly to nearly zero energy buildings. So also here we see this, let's say, different or similar objectives as for Tidefen. That is, first of all, raise awareness about the potential of ventilative cooling. At the same time, raise awareness about existing bottlenecks, and in particular, I think the role of legislation and calculation procedures for the EBB become more and more dominant. Raise awareness about interesting approaches, and then support to or planning priority actions for, let's say, a correct market uptake or accelerated market uptake of ventilative cooling strategies. So also here we see this combination between IEA and this heavily industry-driven platform, whereas now it's on the one side of IEA, not only EIVC, but in particular Annex 62, because their topic is specifically dealing with ventilative cooling. And you see here we have a website where on the left-hand side you see Venticool, on the left-hand side, right side Annex 62. So a common website, because basically we are dealing the same topic but with different points of attention. And also here we have a newsletter which can be freely downloaded. Third example of combining forces is quality check. It's a quite different context. What's the context? So as you know, as I said already before, we are moving quickly to, in particular for new buildings, very energy efficient buildings driven by legislation. So we want really to come in the green area. Of course, imposing requirements is one thing, declaring is another thing, but the question is what is in the reality? And so we should check in the reality is indeed the performance as they declare or as we declare. That's one concern. So compliance, really delivering what is in the legislation and or what you declare in your EPC. The other thing is about the quality of the works. We want indeed works which are done correctly, take insulation, but take in this area, of course, ventilation, so correct installed systems and not like, for example, here where I think even as an expert you can understand this is not working well. So with respect to quality, I think it has to do with how can we create boundary conditions that indeed the energetic quality is as what you should expect, that the quality of system also in terms of durability is okay, and that the quality of execution, the quality of workmanship is also okay. So that's the scope of the quality check project, which is part of Intelligent Energy Europe, and which is expected to start, let's say, next month in March for 3 years. So what is the scope of it? It's to, first of all, in a work package, try to collect from a lot of countries experiences with, let's say, on the one hand, compliance issues, on the other hand, quality of the work. So what do we find in practice? Hopefully a number of good examples, but I expect also quite a lot of negative examples. Therefore, you see red and green. And then we have 3 work packages focusing on providing solutions. So one work package about where do we find or what are interesting approaches to come to more reliable EPC input data. Secondly, interesting solutions for better quality of the works, and in most cases linked to a legislative framework or incentives and so on. And then a third work package on focusing compliance issues. So how can governments or other organizations indeed have a framework that indeed the market is pushed to or good compliance and or good quality of the works. And there we have a lot of dissemination activities. Now, what's the link with AIVC? We have foreseen in this overall scope 4 focus areas on transmission, on summer comfort, on ventilation and air tightness, on HVAC and renewables. It's clear that ventilation and air tightness is really in the scope of what we do in AIVC, but for example also for summer, there clearly ventilative cooling is important, so there clearly we want to have a very effective collaboration. So to conclude, I think it's clear ventilation is a key aspect of concern in this very quickly changing context of more energy efficient buildings in terms of guaranteeing good indoor air quality and at the same time high energy efficiency. What I think is a clear issue of concern is the role of energy legislation becoming more and more dominant, as well for ventilation, air tightness and ventilative cooling, that we try to contribute to the development of appropriate boundary conditions, and that finally also AIVC tries to play, let's say, a role in stimulating international collaboration. Thank you for your attention, and I give the floor back to Alexander.